Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be diving into Wraithlords and Wraithseers in today's video. A couple of units in which both I and a lot of the community have a mixed opinion about. However, contrary to probably what most of the competitive Eldar community thinks about Wraithlords and Wraithseers, I actually believe that they only have a couple of minor issues that keep them from competitive play. And with the new Pariah Nexus mission pack coming out very soon, I actually think that Wraithlords and Wraithseers are much better equipped to deal with what we might face very soon. And as a matter of fact, we might actually see more Wraithlords and Wraithseers appearing in competitive lists to deal with the heavy infantry that no doubt people are going to start fielding. So before we get into the why, let's take a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about in today's video. The first thing, of course, is we're going to be doing a quick review of the stats, weapons, and special rules of both the Wraithlord and Seer. We're going to be looking at their strengths and weaknesses, combos and synergies. We're going to be talking about equipping your Wraithlord or Wraithseer appropriately, and the role a Wraithseer or Wraithlord plays in an Eldar army, and how to use one on the battlefield. As for the basic stat line, they have pretty solid defensive stats with toughness 11, 2+ save, and 10 wounds, which isn't bad all considered. And on top of that, they do have movement 8, so they are kind of on the slower side for monsters. The Wraithseer is pretty much identical to the Wraithlord in every way, except it has a 5+ invulnerable save. For those of you guys wondering, that essentially will only matter for weapons that are AP -4 or greater. We are seeing more of these. We are seeing more Melta weapons and stuff like that. But keep in mind that if the Wraithlord is in cover, it's still going to be basically the same as what the invul would provide you. So unfortunately, the Wraithseer's invul just isn't quite good enough to make it substantial against most weapons in the game. However, if you're out in the open and somebody's shooting Melta shots at you or something with AP -4, it is pretty decent to have. As far as their ranged weapons go, the Wraithlord itself can take some flamers, can take 2 flamers, of course, which has some nice overwatch potential against chaff infantry, basically light infantry with a low save and toughness. Missile launchers are heavy weapons that the Wraithlord can take, and they're pretty versatile as far as a choice, but they're best against light infantry or light large targets, things like sentinels, land speeders, and basically anything below toughness 10. The Bright Lance is the go-to weapon for the Wraithlord, basically a great anti-large weapon, and the most popular choice due to its power in Overwatch. Scatter lasers are pretty good against light infantry and not much else. Shuriken cannons are, of course, good marine equivalent killers with sustained hits, which does slightly negate the ballistic skill 4+ of the Wraithlord and Wraithseer. The Wraithlord, instead of flamers, can alternatively take shuriken catapults, but these are basically worse in every way to the flamers except for their range. Yes, they do have AP -1, but the flamers have ignored cover. And most of the time, the ironic thing is, enemies will be in cover or at least getting the benefit of cover. And now even more so, because in Pariah Nexus, there is a mission rule that basically gives your entire army cover on the first battle round. So shuriken catapults, unfortunately, just not that great. The Star Cannon is pretty good, and I actually think that the Star Cannon might be on the rise in Pariah Nexus because of the plethora of heavy infantry that we'll probably see. Being strength 8 means toughness 4 is wounded on a 2+, and AP -3 negates some of that cover save that opponents are inevitably going to have. The Wraithseer, instead of coming with 2 flamers, comes with Destructor, which is basically a heavy flamer without ignores cover. Honestly, I don't think Destructor is that good, personally, and I certainly don't think it's a good substitute for 2 flamers, but it does have AP -1 and strength 5, so it does hit a little bit harder, but you just don't get 2 of them. The Wraithseer, in addition to being able to take all the heavy weapons that the Wraithlord can take, can also take a D cannon, but a much weaker version. It's essentially a 24-inch Wraith cannon, which kind of sucks. This is a big letdown in comparison to the 9th edition Wraithseer, so that's unfortunate. And the Wraithseer, of course, can only take 1 heavy weapon instead of 2, so there is a bit of a trade-off there, unfortunately. As far as their melee weapons, though, this is kind of where the Wraithseer, in my opinion, pulls ahead. The Wraithlord does do pretty well in melee, though, with the Ghostglaive. It hits really hard against both Marines and lighter targets, being strength 10, AP -3 on the strike, and D6 +1 damage means it can damage heavy infantry, really heavy infantry like Terminators, and lighter vehicles alike. Basically, anything that's a transport, toughness 9 or below, is going to be in range of a Wraithlord to kill. The Ghostglaive sweep, on the other hand, is better against lighter targets. Most of the time, against tougher targets like Marines, you just want to go, basically with the strike every time. But against, things like Sisters of Battle or, less armored targets that maybe have a couple wounds or feel no pain, the sweep isn't bad either. As for the Wraithseer, the Ghost Spear also has a dual profile. The strike is pretty good with anti-infantry 2+, strength 10, only AP -2 though, and a flat damage of 3. So overall less damage, but more precise, and of course it has precision, so it's good against killing characters. The sweep, on the other hand, is only damage 1, AP -1, but has the benefit of anti-infantry and a bunch of attacks, 12 instead of the 8 from the Wraithlord. So in general, the Wraithlord is going to be much better at killing Terminators and, basically 3 wound or above infantry in combat, as well as light vehicles, whereas the Ghost Spear from the Wraithseer is going to be better at killing either characters or light infantry. As far as their abilities go, the Wraithlord has the Fated Hero, which means it gets a Fate dice for destroying enemy units, pretty standard there. The Wraithseer, on the other hand, causes battle shock tests on one unit that it shoots at, which isn't that great of an ability when all is said and done, but might be a little bit better in the new Pariah Nexus. As for the keywords that the Wraithlord and Wraithseer have, both of them have the Monster keyword and Wraith Construct, which prevents them from doing certain things. However, when we get to the Wraithseer, it also has the Psyker keyword, which does make it additionally weak against certain weapons and abilities. Alright, so as far as their strengths and weaknesses, their strengths are that they are durable to an extent, the Wraithseer even more, although only slightly. They have decent range capabilities, and they have strong melee damage output, even though they do hit on a 4+. As far as their weaknesses go, they do hit on a 4+, which is a bit swingy, and, when you consider that they do get 1 reroll to hit and wound, as per our detachment bonus, that does also kind of, make them a little bit, unfortunately, less reliable. And they are a bit expensive. So that's the other thing a lot of people say about them, that they are probably about 20 points too expensive. And for the most part, I would agree. They are a little bit expensive for, what they can do. And I really just think it comes down to the ability itself that's not worth much. And that's why they do, seem a little bit overcosted. As far as their combos and synergies, Guide allows them to hit more reliably, which is good, but probably not the best target for a Guide. Fortune makes them more durable, and if you are running a Wraithlord in smaller point games, it's probably the best target for Fortune. A Spiritseer can give them lethal hits and +1 to hit, which makes them much more reliable, but also more vulnerable to anti-infantry and anti-psyker, as well as anti-character weapons and abilities. So, in my opinion, Spiritseer a little bit of a trap since the last set of nerfs, which, nerfed Fate's Messenger, and also our favorite stratagem, Phantasm, of course, got nerfed from 7 inches to D6, and Shroudrunners can also paint their target with lethals, but again, with a Wraithlord, has a low volume of attacks, and generally is, not going to be affected by lethal hits that often. Alright, so here is the $1 million question. How do you equip your Wraithlord or Wraithseer in the most effective way? Now, tradition would have us believe that the Bright Lance is the best option, but I've been doing a little bit of thinking about this, and I've been kind of absorbing knowledge from the community on this since the beginning of the edition, and I actually think that the Bright Lances, although a very good loadout, may not be the best for every situation and every meta. And recently, I've actually been thinking of the Bright Lance and Star Cannon combo. Now, let me kind of run through why I think that. And it essentially has to do with Math Hammer. And the fact of the matter is that the Wraithlord with dual Bright Lances only gets 2 shots, which means you have about a 50% chance to hit. On average dice, you'll probably get 1 hit, maybe 2. So, 1.5 hit with the reroll. But the cool thing about the Brightlands Star Cannon combo is not only do you get a greater chance to hit initially, but the overwatch chances of hitting are drastically increased. And your ability to fish for a 6 increases dramatically. So let's, for example, say that the Wraithlord is shooting at something lighter, maybe like a Rhino, or maybe even something like a Venom or a Raider. 2 Brightlands shots on their own initially have a 33% chance of scoring at least 1 hit. However, as we all know, in most cases, you're not going to get that 6, and you're just going to spend a fate dice on the reroll to move that Brightlands to a 6 so you can hit, wound pretty easily with a reroll, and then force an invul on your opponent. However, with the Star Cannon, you actually have about a 50% chance to hit, which is much greater, of course, than 33% with the dual Brightlances. And that means on average, if you do get at least 1 6 on the Star Cannons, the Brightlands can be turned to that 6 with the Fate dice, and you will have a much better chance of one-shotting that 6-wound light vehicle. And of course, the Star Cannon has the added effect of just being better against heavy infantry in general. You know, not necessarily on Overwatch, but in other scenarios. So you don't really lose a lot in Overwatch by doing this, but you also gain a little bit against heavy infantry. And also against light vehicles, both in Overwatch and normally. Because, you know, most light vehicles aren't going to be able to survive a Brightlands anyway, and they're definitely not going to be able to survive a Brightlands and a Star Cannon. Now, on the other hand, if you find yourself in a meta without a lot of vehicles, a lot of infantry, the Shuriken Cannons are very good against Marine equivalent enemies, but also against enemies with Feel No Pain, things like Orc Boys and stuff. And of course, you do have the Flamers as well. So this package makes the Wraithlord much better at controlling the midboard, bruising and brawling it up with enemy infantry units over objectives, and does allow it to hit a lot more reliably. However, it does lose some of the effectiveness of Overwatch. However, don't underestimate sustained hits. A good spiked roll, maybe even with a guide cast on it in lower point games, can actually be effective. The last option that some people might be thinking about is the double missile launcher. This is something I was very optimistic about in the beginning of the edition, but as the edition wore on, honestly, it doesn't have that many applications. There's a couple of armies which it's really good against, like Tyranids and Imperial Guard, but other than that, it just seems to fall flat, in my opinion. Now, as for the Wraithseer only has 1 weapon option, so a Bright Lance is probably the best option there, just so that you can have a little bit of Overwatch potential. However, the D-Cannon might seem like a good idea to some people, but it's an absolute trap. It's very underwhelming. The Devastating Wounds is nice, but it only procs once in a while. Again, remember, it's not the beginning of the edition when it was doing mortals and stuff like that. The Devastating Wounds on this thing just isn't that good, as it only has D6 damage, and it only has a 24-inch range, so it's really not going to be effective in most situations for you. Alrighty, so as a little bit of a bonus, I have a few diagrams here to kind of illustrate how to use a Wraithlord in your games, and kind of how to position the Wraithlord for success on the battlefield. So a lot of you have been going up against Chaos Space Marines. As a matter of fact, I have a game against them later today, and one of the biggest concerns in the Eldar community, and in pretty much every community, is Warp Talons. How do you deal with a unit that can just hop back in reserve after destroying an enemy unit? Well, my friends, the answer to that is a durable unit that can heroically intervene like a Wraithlord. Now, it does cost 2 command points, but keep in mind that by killing the unit of Warp Talons, first of all, Warp Talons are not that cheap. They're about 110 points. So it is a decent investment from your opponent. And also, if they do have a unit of Warp Talons in their army, chances are they are relying on them to clear chaff, to clear objectives in your backfield. And if you can prevent this from happening, then the enemy army might have a lot harder of a time of getting to your most vulnerable support units. So in this example, a unit of 5 Warp Talons charges into an Autarch Wayleaper because, of course, that's a great target for them, right? It's pretty squishy, only has 4 wounds, doesn't have the greatest invul save, 4+ is good, but it's not unbeatable, right? And on average dice, a unit of Warp Talons in a Renegade Raiders list should make quick work of an Autarch Wayleaper, whether it has fights first or not. However, if we include a Wraithlord in the equation, we can, of course, use the Wraithlord to heroically intervene. Now, in most cases, the Autarch itself is probably still going to die, which means the Warp Talons traded up, but at least in this case, the Warp Talons aren't going to be able to hop back in reserve and kill all of your Swooping Hawks, Warp Spiders, and all the other units in your army. And Warp Talons won't be able to just scurry back into reserves and, come in next turn via rapid ingress. So it's going to put your opponent in a really tricky position where, yeah, they did trade up with your Autarch Wayleaper, but remember, if you did take a Phoenix Gem, you can always revive it. And second of all, now your Warp Talons are stuck into combat with a Wraithlord, which they're not going to win against. Warp Talons will lose against a Wraithlord each and every time. So I like using a Wraithlord in this way if I know my opponent has some, deep strike shenanigans or, a heavy kind of reserve presence that they can just bring on the board and charge my vulnerable units in the backfield. I like putting a Wraithlord back there to either deter them from doing so or heroically intervene and destroy the unit for trying. And yes, I do realize that heroic intervention is 2 CP, but in my experience, if your opponent is trying this kind of strategy, they're already probably going to plan on pumping some stratagems into being able to kill your units in the backfield anyway. So you definitely need to respond in some way, and I think heroic intervention is probably the best defense for that. And, keep in mind that because we are Eldar, we naturally just have more command points anyway due to the Autarch Wayleaper. Now, the next scenario I want to go over is something I've talked about before, but I do want to mention it again, and that is, of course, baiting your opponent into revealing their more expensive units. A couple of players have asked me in the past, how do you bait your opponent's more expensive units out into the open so that you can shoot them and blast them apart? Well, in one of my previous videos, I mentioned that you could put an Avatar of Cain on an objective, and because the Avatar of Cain is a big threat, your opponent would probably move units into a position to kill it, which would in turn make those units vulnerable. And most of the time, because it's the Avatar of Cain, unless your opponent is bringing some very specialized firepower, as long as you have Fortune up, the Avatar of Cain should be able to live through that one. And in return, because we play Eldar and we have very high damage anti-large weaponry like Fire Prisms, Fire Dragons, and of course Bright Lances, your opponent is most likely going to lose whatever they brought out to try to kill the Avatar with. However, you can do something similar with the Wraithlord. Now, you probably will lose the Wraithlord, but the Wraithlord is half the cost of the Avatar, actually a little bit less than half. So by using a Wraithlord to move out, kill a unit on an objective, probably a unit of 5 Marines, something like that early on in the game, you can indeed bait your opponent into moving out more than they actually need to kill the Wraithlord. And the reason for this is the Wraithlord has the Overwatch potential up to 24 inches, whereas the Avatar only has an Overwatch of 12. So that means you can do some cheeky damage before the Wraithlord goes down. And of course, your opponent is going to have to reveal at least something with 3 last cannons or more and probably some buffs to be able to get rid of that Wraithlord. And the reason I say 3 is because the Wraithlord has 10 wounds. Remember, each last cannon is doing about 4 to 5 wounds worth of damage if it actually does hit and wound it, and, you fail your 6-up armor save. So essentially, it's going to have to take an anti-large specialist to bring down the Wraithlord. So, something like a Predator Annihilator or a Ballistus Dreadnought, something along those lines. But because of how terrain is laid out and because of how line of sight is, if you put your Wraithlord out there, most likely you'll get the chance to Overwatch first, deal some automatic damage to it, and, basically trade up. Because remember, if a Ballistus Dreadnought walks out and you're able to deal 5 damage to it, which is half of its wounds, you're essentially killing about 75 points worth of enemy model before they get to actually attack. And again, yes, they might kill you, but you'll have tools ready to kill that unit in return. And because we have things like Fire and Fade, we can actually keep our Warwalkers and other units safe while our opponent really can't. So we can kind of afford to make those early trades and lure out our, opponent's greatest threats. And your opponent can't really do the same to us. So in conclusion, while the Wraithlord wasn't exactly able to make its points back itself, it got pretty close, and it was able to make sure that other units in our army made their own points back and more. And honestly, that goes for Wraithseers too. Wraithseers can pretty much do the same thing because, again, they do have that bright lance on them, and they can indeed overwatch and also destroy enemy units in combat pretty effectively. Okay, so what role does a Wraithseer or Wraithlord play in an Eldar army, and how do you use one? Well, both Wraithlords and Wraithseers are versatile units that are good at defending the backfield or engaging enemy units in no man's land in order to bait out more expensive enemy units. And in some cases, they are durable enough, depending on where your opponent's units are, to survive on that objective and score you some primary victory points. Both are also very effective at destroying mech targets, so of course marine equivalent targets, and can punch up into large units, albeit a little bit unreliably because they do hit on a 4+. As for the differences between Wraithlords and Wraithseers and which ones you should take, Wraithlords do have a little bit more firepower, so if you need a little bit more range in your army, you do want to go for the Wraithlord, and the Wraithseers can wreck enemy characters. So again, if you're not so, hot on killing enemy characters in combat, or, dealing with a large swathe of enemy infantry, if that anti-infantry 2+ doesn't really call for you, or you don't really think you need it, then it's probably best to stick to the Wraithlord. However, again, if you're in a meta which is very heavy on infantry, especially lighter infantry or heavier infantry, things that are, toughness 6 and above, then you probably want to go for that Wraithseer. Okay, so in conclusion, Wraithseers and Wraithlords may be a bit overcosted due to their lackluster abilities, but they are solid pieces when placed and used correctly. And again, they are decently durable targets. Your opponent does have to kind of, actually put some significant effort into killing. They're definitely not going to go down to plasma guns or some other type of anti-marine equivalent type of weapon. They're going to need heavy weapons to be able to be brought down. And whether it be scrapping in the midboard or defending your backlines, the Wraith Bros can definitely pull their weight. And again, I've used both Wraithseers and Wraithlords effectively, even against, competent opponents. They do pretty well. You just need to know what their limits are. You can't expect them to do too much. They're not an Avatar of Cain. They're not a Yin-Karn. So they're not going to survive as long as either of the avatars or do nearly as much damage, but they can still force your opponent to reveal some of their units so that your army can then pick them off and destroy them. Which at the end of the day is one of the biggest strengths of the Eldar, basically being able to pick out a unit in the enemy army and wipe it out very efficiently. And if a 160 point Wraithlord can help you bait out more points than the Wraithlord is worth, then it is definitely a model worth considering in your list. And just one last thing to leave you guys off on, the Wraithlord itself might actually be a lot more durable in Pariah Nexus due to the fact that people are going to be tooling their armies to kill battle line and to kill marines. So of course that means Wraithlords won't go down as easily because there's going to be a lot less anti-large weaponry that's going to be pointed their way. So that's something else to think about. Wraithlords do seem a little bit fragile right now in the current meta, but that's because a lot of people are bringing the heat with big anti-large weaponry. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of Wraithlords and Wraithseers and if they have more play in Pariah Nexus. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And I also want to give a big shout out to all of my Patreons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last year and a half. Your help has greatly improved the channel and helped it grow significantly. If you do want to help support the channel, I have free trials on my Patreon activated, which will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategy, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description below. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some Eldar-inspired apparel on the store page, or you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon, I will leave the links for those in the description also. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. More to come. I have a game against Chaos Space Marines later today. I will definitely do a video telling you guys about my game and also, giving you guys some tips and tricks into beating the Chaos Space Marines very soon. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today, and see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.